Hello and welcome to Clavis Arcana Māla, the hidden keys of Apple. We'll be going over the basics of configuration profiles. I've been a Mac administrator at a small Midwestern university for a little over 20 years. Uh, Basically, care and feeding of iOS and macOS devices. The university in question, University of Wisconsin River Falls, was founded 1874, has about 5,300 students, 800 staff, a single unified IT department, which is kind of unusual for the UW system, and again, a mix of macOS, iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, with 255 configuration profiles currently doing something or other on them. So, what are configuration profiles? Here's Apple's definition. That's clear to everybody, right? Here's Apple from Apple's training, a slightly better definition, just a XML file ending in mobile config that has payloads with settings, authorization for Apple devices. Functionally, they are basically portable preferences that you can move from one computer to another. If you happen to be from or work extensively in the Windows world, they can functionally mimic INI or registry files. However, they aren't just preferences. They can trigger actions on the computer, join a given Wi-Fi network, bind to a directory server, or enroll a machine into an MDM. Their extension is pretty consistently mobile config. For what's worth, on the MIME type, the Aspen is a reference to an Apple code name for some of the early development environment for the iPhone. If you happen to ever serve configuration profiles off a web server for just general public use, make sure that MIME type is configured, though thankfully over the years that's become less and less of a problem. Internally, they are formatted like Apple property lists, the plist files you might have encountered elsewhere. However, they are not the most common type, the application preference property lists. They essentially are a more restricted subset with their own set of keys and definitions. Structurally, when they're on the move, they are usually XML, but fun detail, there are exceptions. What a configuration profile can or can't do is defined by Apple and the app manufacturers. Capabilities can vary by the platform you're deploying them to. The OS version, features come and go, and the delivery method. MDM devices might be MDM supervised, which gives them access to certain keys, MDM managed, which is lesser, gives them fewer keys, or simply manually deployed, which oddly enough gives them a couple of keys MDMs don't have, but blocks a whole bunch of others. Fun detail on the app manufacturer's part, the capabilities and the key names can be determined by the app manufacturer, and I have encountered every once in a while you will get unlucky and a given app maker decides to change the key name for a given action in a config profile, and sometimes they document it. Usually you are not that lucky. In terms of things changing over time, it's like you can no longer whitelist kernel extensions because Apple doesn't allow third-party kernel extensions, while older Macs won't, before about Big Sur, will not be happy if you try to authorize screen recording for an app because they're not aware you're supposed to limit that. The name for a capability in a configuration profile is a payload type. The key names in config profiles are almost always going to be lots of words chained together, while the payloads themselves tend to follow the reverse JSON notation. In terms of what they are not, even though as a practical matter you can't talk about payloads or configuration profiles much without talking about MDM, they aren't MDMs. MDMs are basically the way they get out onto devices. They aren't management commands, which are also XML formatted and in a lot of ways look similar with a similar payload structure. They are not app configs, which even though again, looks similar, can be transmitted with an MDM in a similar way. And as I mentioned before, they are not the application property lists. And one other they aren't schema, but which I'll cover a little later, but one other quirky nomenclature issue, they are not 8021X profiles, even though a configuration profile is the only way you can get an 8021X profile onto an Apple device. Structurally, what's in them? Payloads. Configuration profiles will always start out with a root payload of payload type surprise configuration, then have a bunch of payloads for whatever the profile is actually supposed to be doing. In turn, depending if it's appropriate, for instance, you're configuring a dock where you want multiple apps in the dock on a Mac, a payload may have more sub-payloads in it. And whether or not a payload is allowed to have, whether or not you can have multiple payloads for a given payload type just depends on that type. For instance, you can only have one SSO payload, one directory binding payload. But say certificates, have fun, as many as you like. So what does that look like? Behold, configuration profile. Again, UUID, organization, all nicely formatted XML. This is sort of if you are trying to work with or edit a configuration profile, this is probably close to your ideal. It will not always be close to your ideal. Behold the same configuration profile. Automated tools frequently like to spit it out without formatting, apparently not getting the memo about XML is supposed to be human readable. If you do run into that, there is a command line utility, XML lint, built into all Macs, going back at least 5 years, I think closer to 8 at this point. Linter is just a nickname for something that checks programming codes and languages. XML, technically not a programming language, but in Mac it gets a linter. Now, as I mentioned, configuration profiles are XML. Apple's definition says, yes, they're always XML. They might be signed, in which case it'll have binary gobbledygook and XML. You might be tempted to just remove this in a text editor. There can be gremlins inside a signed configuration profile depending on how big it is, which will, even if you take off the top and much longer set of certificates on the bottom of one of these, will still mean it's invalid XML, invalid config profile. So instead, to remove them, the Mac security command, CMS, if you're curious, is cryptographic messaging system. But this is how you tell security in a configuration profile to die. The capital D is just decode. if you're encountering signed ones, typically there'll be something you made years ago, signed with a certificate you now want to get rid of, or something you got from somebody else signed with their certificate, which your organization won't necessarily recognize as valid. Okay. There is also a OpenSSL command which performs the same function, but I haven't found any advantage to it since, as you can see, the syntax is more complex. Technically, if you're doing this from Windows or non-Mac Unix systems, it's much more likely to be available, but doesn't have much advantage beyond that. Yes. Fun detail, I'm having problems logging into my GitHub, so I'm not sure where, but I'll post them somewhere. Again, Apple's definition says configuration profiles are XML. Everybody else's definition does. Behold, a configuration profile, completely valid, identical to the other two slides with not a scrap of XML in it. Configuration profiles follow the same definition sort of rules as Apple's property lists for application preferences, just with different syntax. Application properties lists have the plain XML form and a binary form denoted by the little BP list, binary properties list header at the top. You probably won't encounter these in real life, but they are the way, or they are almost certainly the way MDMs are actually, and Apple themselves are slinging configuration profiles between computers. Just in case you do, and for that matter, more handily if you are dealing with binary properties lists in a text editor, which is way more common. The properties list utility, again built into Macs, has a conversion function. One note of caution, unlike most of these other commands which fail if you don't specify an output or kick it out to standard out, properties list utility will overwrite the file you are dealing with unless you explicitly tell it to output somewhere else. If you're interested in composing configuration profiles, the payload identifiers are, again, typically strings following the reverse DNS format of JSON. They technically can be how the MDM tells one configuration profile from another. They usually aren't. But if you, whenever you get started creating them, make sure to set up your organization's identifier into this format. A lot of tools will not do it by default. You have to dig into their preferences. Meanwhile, the part where that most MDMs do use to tell one profile from another is the UUID. That is supposed to follow a specification called RFC 9562, guaranteed to be producing a number 128 bits long, guaranteed to be unique over both space and time in what's one of the trippier man pages I've ever read, but not quite the worst. They do need to be unique. If you get a profile from another source and are intent on deploying yourself, you should change them in the profile sort of to make it yours and avoid the risk, however slim, of collisions. Of note, another common convention is to take the UUID and make that into the payload identifier, or make it part of the identifier, in which case, yeah, you'll see the same UUID in multiple places in the same profile. That's fine. For profiles with multiple payloads, each payload has its own UUID and identifier. Okay, the descriptions are sort of the user-readable part of a configuration profile. Again, technically every payload can have one. In practice, the one you care about is going to be at the root level, which, amongst other things, is what users will see in the Profiles Pref pane on Macs or in settings in highly variable locations, currently VPN and device management in iOS. Put something in there, fill it out to reduce the risk of, one, freaked out users, and also as a favor to yourself or your successors, so you have some idea of what this profile does or what it is supposed to do. It's basically internal documentation. So everybody's comfortable with like hand editing XML. We can move on to the Vi versus Emacs war part of the panel. You will probably want a automated tool to deal with configuration profiles, and in particular writing them, because the syntax is complex. So there are several. One profile that I use pretty heavily, Profile Creator. It's free, open source. It handles issues like cryptographic signing. It keeps a record of the profiles you build with it. It also has access to a schema project, i.e. meaning it knows and will continuously update itself with new configuration profile definitions as they come out, and includes an assortment for all of the major Apple platforms, plus dozens, probably a couple hundred at this point, of common app configurations. Slight downsides: it is rough around the edges in places. The UI can be confusing, but it works. It's definitely worth a try. There is also a very similar one called the iMazing profile editor. iMazing's just a company with a substantial number of Mac and iOS products. They're actually one of the few I know of who has a profile editor but no MDM software of their own. So they have made their MDM freely available. It is the only one I know of that has a Windows version. It is in the Microsoft App Store. If you do switch to its XML editor mode, it supports themes, which again is unusual for profile editor apps. Usually the XML editor they have tends to be on the afterthought side. One downside: it is a free product, but closed source, and because you can't buy it, you can't get professional support on it. You're dependent on the community, which is good, but finite and sometimes not to the satisfaction of business use cases. Apple has their own configurator, which, has one in one of their apps, Apple Configurator. It's free if you pay the Apple tax for everything else, available in the App Store. It is definitely quite Apple-like, easy to use. It will deploy the profiles you build to devices you plug into the computer you are running Apple Configurator on. Essentially, it can be a wired MDM, but not much more than that. Major weakness is it only has iOS and iPad OS profiles, even though Configurator itself is quite useful with newer Macs, especially Apple Silicon ones. Go figure, hopefully they cover that gap in functionality at some point. Apple also has Apple Business Essentials, which does include Mac coverage. It's web-based, more capable than Configurator. It essentially is a light-duty MDM extension to Apple Business Manager. So if you are familiar with that, it's more of the same. The weaknesses of it are it's kind of aimed at the small business end of things. Apple doesn't pretend it scales well, and it is, unlike a lot of Apple products, not available to education. There is no equivalent in Apple School Manager. So, and also it is not available anywhere but the US at the moment, apparently. Most MDMs will have their own profile editors built into them. These are usually easy to use, or at least as easy to use as anything else in that MDM is. Browser-based, so nothing to install. Downsides, the feature support is wildly unpredictable. It's like how Mac-centric is the company you're buying the MDM from. Also, the profiles they produce often have things in them you might not be expecting. It's click these settings, it will produce a configuration profile which will have those settings and maybe just them, maybe something else, who knows. They aren't free, but they're available, and gee, salespeople are standing by right down the hall waiting to tell you about all sorts of wonderful ones. There are also more specialized apps that sort of do one thing, essentially one type of payload in the profiles they create. They are almost always web-based. DocMaster, for instance, does nothing but doc settings for Macs. DNS Profile Creator produces guess what for macOS or iOS devices. The EduRoam Configuration Assistance tool creates nothing but 802.1x profiles for EduRoam. If you are very lucky on a given app from hopefully perhaps some larger company, or just some company where some engineer thought of Apple users, they might have a tool like this. Poke around their documentation, ask other users, dare to dream. Meanwhile, schema are the definition, aka profile manifests, are sort of dictionaries or definitions of what can be in a given configuration profile payload. They are sometimes in XML, sometimes in JSON. They are not configuration profiles themselves, but if loaded into an editor that supports them, and most of the fully fledged editors do, they will give it new capabilities and let you do configuration profile payloads for a new app, even if that editor is not aware of it. It's another area where, yeah, if you're getting this commercial app from a company and it's Apple sort of seems an Apple-aware company, check around through their documentation, see if they mention schema anywhere. Again, they can be XML or JSON. The logo is actually from the Profile Manifests project on GitHub, and the QR as well. Just a source of oodles of them and it's used by the iMazing Profile Creator and Jamf and a whole bunch of others. Okay. Signing, cryptographic signing, essentially amounts to tamper-proofing a configuration profile by signing it with a code signing certificate that you have. It reassures your users, it can cut down on security fatigue, avoid the ugly little red and dire warning on the left there in favor of the quieter, happier profile on the right. It is not just useful for tamper-proofing from adversaries. Many MDMs have a habit of especially Jamf, have a habit of rewriting the configuration profiles in them into syntax they know. Cryptographically signing a profile prevents that and can be useful if you just want the MDM to serve up the profile as it is. Of note, if the MDM supports variable expansion, again, a common feature, signing the profile defeats that. Usually, if you're in that situation where you need signed, you just have the MDM build one profile to push over the settings you want, and yeah, do a signed one for the ones you want. Of note, you need a code signing certificate, obviously, for this. But unlike Mac OS binary or iOS binaries and installer packages, you don't need Apple developer code signing certificates. If you've got your own CA for your organization that you can get to issue a certificate and that your managed device is already trusting, use it. For actually doing the signing, at a previous Mac admin hackathon, there was created Hancock. Very useful tool, has one job. The entire interface is that little dialog box on the left. Otherwise, if you just love those command line securities, so much as security will remove them, it will impose them. It will also do configuration profile settings. One note on this command, the -n technology services is the name of the certificate that you are using to sign. There is no guarantee that certificates need to be uniquely named. You can point security to which certificate to use with things other than the name. Just keep that in mind if you, say, have a pile-on of a few years of old and new technology services certificates. Everybody got it copied who wants it? Atomicity in this context means configuration profiles fail or succeed as a whole when you install them. A failure of any one payload in a configuration profile means the whole profile fails in taking any other payloads with it, even if they're fine. Therefore, don't make big configuration profiles. A profile should have like as few payloads as it needs to get the job done it is supposed to do. There is the temptation in some MDMs that are less responsive, like Intune, or tend to be less responsive, like Intune, to cram everything into a profile you can because you only have so many opportunities to push it, or just for the sort of advantage of having fewer things to juggle, you might want to cram in a bunch of payloads. Generally, you should not, because it makes diagnostics a major headache and increases the likelihood that devices won't get managed the way you want. When you remove configuration profiles with MDM in the profiles pane or wherever, it does not magically revert to the prior state. That's generally a good thing. If you use a configuration profile to, say, bind a machine to a directory server, then decide you want to switch to platform SSO and remove it, you don't want all of the accounts that have been created that way to be deleted without warning. Much of what removing a profile often will remove a lot of its behaviors. Wi-Fi networks, the credentials will be gone. They may or may not be forgotten. Certificates evaporate, but in other cases, pieces might remain behind. Dock items don't always get pulled. Application settings may be maintained by the application, even if they have technically vanished, because applications like maintaining their state, otherwise they wouldn't keep preferences. And other example I know of, time zones don't shift back. For bonus points on macOS, accessibility is unpredictable to the point where I would not recommend you touch that with configuration profiles. If you're in situations where apply configuration profiles, setting changes, remove it, setting goes away, apply it or a variant again, you can never set the settings again for no particularly clear reason. Similarly, configuration profiles are XML sort of when they are at rest or in storage somewhere. When they are in transit or in use on a device, they essentially cease to exist in that form. They do get written to certain databases, such as system configure. There's a database file called system configuration on Macs for them. But you essentially are never getting them back from the computer once you install them on it. Use a Git, use whatever sort of archive tool you want, but keep your configuration profiles around because you won't be able to extract them. Of note, I have seen this profiles list command, which gives you this nice XML formatted thing that looks sort of like a configuration profile, but mentioned as a way to sort of reverse it and get them out of the computer. It's not. And even wackier, the part about where it's double hyphen all to single hyphen output is contrary to almost all Unix and command line conventions, but correct. That's how the command, to the degree it does work, works. Okay. You might also run across a lot of other references to the profiles command. It installs profiles, it removes profiles. It did all of this years ago before Apple systematically started nerfing it. Unfortunately, any documentation you see regarding installing or removing profiles you can pretty much ignore at this point. It still has some useful features related to ADE, formerly DEP, bootstrap tokens, and so on. So the command is still there, but ironically, less and less of what it does has anything to do with profiles. You can happily, and lots of people do, deploy profiles without an MDM. The eduroam cat tool I mentioned earlier is entirely predicated around that, with just visit this website, download a profile, stick it on your device, and voila, you've got Wi-Fi at 1,000 places. It's handy for some bring your own device scenarios. It adds 2 keys that you do not get with MDM profiles, consent text and prompt for credentials. Consent text is just a wall of plain text that appears in the pref pane when you install the profile, saying with whatever you want to say in there. Use it as a chance to sort of remind users what this profile does, reassure them, and note any quirks or additional setup steps they might need to do after installing the profile. Prompt for credentials, most useful in Wi-Fi, but just prompts for a username and password. Few very less commonly used, but keys that, so far as I can tell, go back as long as there have been configuration profiles around. Duration until removal and removal date. Duration until removal is essentially the lifespan of the configuration profile on a computer in seconds from when it is installed. When that time is up, the operating system, I have not absolutely proven, but I believe it's MDM Client D that does this, simply deletes the profile on the computer with no further prompting from or to anything or anyone. removal date is just a fixed in time cousin to it. MDMs typically will not let you at these keys because the MDMs assume they're deciding when a profile gets on and off a computer. There are still cases where they're useful now. If you have a 8021X or Wi-Fi profile that includes a certificate, certificates have finite lifespans. If the certificate expires but the Wi-Fi profile is still there, basically they're not getting on Wi-Fi until typically they're not getting on Wi-Fi until you manually remove it and install a new profile. Having a removal date can sort of ease that process along and would cut down on a lot of tech calls from my institution if other institutions actually did that. In MDM contexts, a duration until removal can be useful for data that you might want to refresh in an automated manner in a profile, since MDMs typically don't do that. Once the profile's on the thing, any settings in the thing are as they are until the computer is out of service. If a profile has a duration until removal, MDM will install it. Eventually, profile will die on its own. MDM will detect this and reinstall it, possibly with updated information of whatever you want. I've used this so a notation about who is the assignee of a computer that is stored as a preference on the computer can periodically be automatically updated in case it changes on our server. Okay. Marking profiles, I should note this is just my name for them. I haven't found a systematic or definition or name for this, but MDMs, as part of their basic function, deploy and keep track of the deployed configuration profiles on a device. You can therefore sort of use profiles as a tool to mark a device with, even if the profile isn't doing something else. In my experience, I don't send out profiles with absolutely empty payloads because sometimes they'll error out because it basically computer detects, hey, this isn't doing anything. Why am I going to try and install it? However, you can set profiles to an app that doesn't exist or that you don't install, and have this marking profile with its unique identifier that you can track present on the computer for whatever you may need it for. So, in terms of what I found handy for making it needing it for, I do use Jamf Pro for management where I work. Jamf Pro, you can deploy configuration profiles automatically, or you can deploy them through through the self-service app, which is basically its version of like Managed App Store or Software Center on the Windows side. You can't do both. You can't automatically deploy a profile and then let the user decide whether or not to keep it in self-service. So, to deal with that, what I hit upon, deploy whatever the desired profile is to the machine. For machines targeted for deployment, exclude any machines with a certain marking profile on it. Basically, you now have two profiles that can't exist on the machine at the same time. So the user, when they want to sort of refresh or remove, depending on the profile, has an item in self-service called reinstall whatever the desired profile is. What it actually does is installs a marking profile with a with a very short lifetime, say 30 seconds. They click that. It installs. At this point, the machine MDM client daemon is going to detect, oh, hey, I've got this new profile on here. It's going to tell Jamf that. Jamf is going to detect, oh, hey, anything with this marking profile isn't supposed to have this profile. The desired the profile you want to get refreshed gets uninstalled. Meanwhile, the marking profile, because it's got essentially an expiration date after, say, 30 seconds or so, it evaporates. MDM client notifies the MDM client on the computer, notifies the MDM server of this, and voila, it reinstalls. You get a sort of new or refreshed version of whatever the profile is, and mostly you in this case is the user, not me. So it is a creative use I've thought of. I guess that is pretty much what I had. Any questions at the moment? Or? And it's my turn to get to deck somebody.
So I'm really curious about that marking profile, and I may have missed a detail there. So the purpose is for like a self-solve issue, like if they're having a problem with the thing, you mark it so that it'll remove and reinstall?
Yeah, the purpose I used it for was, self-solve reinstalling an automatically deployed profile, which I haven't found a great way to do otherwise. Just general things where you want to mark a machine, they are useful. If you have something going on where technicians need to touch every machine and they want to sort of quickly mark this one done to an MDM, have them take a little profile on a flash drive, double-click to install it, and move on. It'll probably be faster than a managed app store self-service, and it sort of will live update your MDM of, okay, this machine has that we needed this extra step or to be touched by a human has actually been touched by a human.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, challenge him. Go for it.
Oh, boy.
So you're using the marking the profiles, using the same concept as like putting a text file inside of a folder and marking it as done.
Yep.
And then using Jamf to scope and look for that file.
Yep.
Is it there?
Yeah,
but
except
you're using profiles instead.
Yeah, if I was using a profile, I'd have to write what Jamf calls an extension attribute specifically to track that during an inventory update, which happens once a day. Using the profile, I don't have to bother writing the EA, and MDM updates tend to run close to real time.
That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to.
Yeah, there are plenty of other ways to do it. You could, again, install a text file, write a do-nothing application. I have done that in the past as well, or install a certificate. Just if you're dealing with profiles anyway, hey, they're simple. And the UUID means they're unique. And if you work with this enough, you will discover the UUID isn't actually enforced to be unique. You could get away with doing configuration profile number 1. Don't! It's no problem until it's a crisis because somebody else created configuration profiles 1, 2, 3.
I typically have installing of profiles manually blocked. So you can't do it manually on our machines anyway. Even the text can't do it, so.
Yeah, and I do for most machines too. It's a holdover from iOS where it was a problem with people blowing away their email settings. blocking the configuration profiles, pref pane, and restrictions will effectively prevent people from manually installing profiles. There's been some bugs that have offered workarounds or the profile command in the past. Apple is patched enough at this point that if you block people from, if you apply a configuration profile restriction on manually installing configuration profiles, it will be honored. And back forward. Okay, will the elf under the chair now speak?
Why is there a UUID and a payload ID?
I don't know.
Interesting.
It is very old. Of note, the payload ID is traditionally human readable. The UUID ideally is that number format, though
Right.
again,
We do.
both of those are pretty loosely enforced. It is very common for the UUID and the payload ID to be made identical.
Okay.
UUID usually has it's tagged with your MDM. It's decoded and it's attached to it.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Decode those per MDM.
Okay.
I don't know it.
Okay.
Look at it. It's interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I've not seen an MDM object, but yeah, that makes sense.
Is that because like of how an MDM decides to generate it, or is that like an Apple sort of thing
It's the way the MDM generates.
and it generates?
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay. And the whiteboard wants a word too. Thank you. Okay, so if you want feedback, of course, I'm open to anything. And yeah, thank you for attending. It's actually more than I was expecting. Thanks. With luck, the room chat should have posted a list of links. I actually don't know if Slack supports time delayed when you are logged out or not. Anybody seeing anything? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, mostly the things that had QR codes and several more besides should be in there. The all of the Unix man pages for the commands I mentioned are in there. However, in terms of untested things, I don't know how Slack deals with custom protocol handlers. If it folded, spinned, and mutilated them, okay, it works, never mind, yay. So clickable links to, that'll open up a terminal on a Mac and x-man-page : and then a command name. It's, so far as I can tell, been around as long as Mac OS 10 has, but it's another one like mobile configs themselves where they're never able to get rid of the X, meaning experimental definition.